So we think Zoom is fixed. Hope you guys can hear us.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Let's start out with the opening prayers, page 5. With all enemies who hate me, hinderers who harm me, and those who obstruct my liberation and omniscience foremost, may all mother sentient beings equal to space have happiness, be free of suffering, and quickly attain precious, unsurpassed, perfect, complete enlightenment. With all enemies who hate me, hinderers who harm me, and those who obstruct my liberation and omniscience foremost. May all mother sentient beings equal to space have happiness, be free of suffering, and quickly attain precious, unsurpassed, perfect, complete enlightenment. With all enemies who hate me, hinderers who harm me, and those who obstruct my liberation and omniscience foremost. May all mother sentient beings equal to space have happiness, be free of suffering, and quickly attain precious, unsurpassed, perfect, complete enlightenment. To this end I apply my body, speech, and mind to virtue till Buddhahood. I apply my body, speech, and mind to virtue until death. I apply my body, speech, and mind to virtue from today until tomorrow at this time. All sentient beings equal to the ends of space take refuge in the nature of all the body, speech, minds, qualities, and activities of those thus gone 10 directions and 3 times, the wellspring of the 84,000 heaps of Dharma, the sovereign of all the noble Sanghas, the glorious and holy kind root and lineage gurus. We take refuge in the assembly of deities in the Mandala. We take refuge in the Buddha Bhagavans. We take refuge in the holy Dharmas. We take refuge in the noble Sanghas. We take refuge in the assembly of Viras, Dakinis, protectors and guardians with the wisdom eye. We take refuge in the glorious and holy kind root and lineage gurus. We take refuge in the assembly of deities in the Yidams Mandala. We take refuge in the Buddha Bhagavans. We take refuge in the holy Dharmas. We take refuge in the noble Sanghas. We take refuge in the assembly of Viras, Dakinis, Dharma, protectors and guardians with the wisdom eye. We take refuge in the glorious and holy kind root and lineage gurus. We take refuge in the assembly of deities in the Mandala. We take refuge in the Buddha Bhagavans. We take refuge in the holy Dharmas. We take refuge in the noble Sanghas. We take refuge in the assembly of Viras, Dakinis, protectors and guardians with the wisdom eye. Till I reach the heart of awakening, I take refuge in the Buddha's all. In the Dharma and assembly of Bodhisattva too I take refuge. Just as all Sugatas of the past brought to birth the mind of awakening, and in each and every training of Bodhisattva step by step did dwell. Just so for the benefit of beings I too bring to birth awakened mind. And in each and every training thus, step by step, I'll train myself like so. Till I reach the heart of awakening, I take refuge in the Buddha's hall. In the Dharma assembly of Bodhisattvas too, I take refuge. Just as all Sugatas of the past brought to birth the mind of awakening. And in each and every training of Bodhisattvas step by step did dwell. Just so for the benefit of beings I too bring to birth awakened mind. And in each and every training thus, step by step, I'll train myself like so. Till I reach the heart of awakening, I take refuge in the Buddha's all. In the Dharma and assembly of Bodhisattvas too I take refuge. Just as all Sugatas of the past brought to birth the mind of awakening. And in each and every training of Bodhisattvas step by step did dwell. Just so for the benefit of beings I too bring to birth awakened mind. And in each and every training thus, step by step, I'll train myself like so. In the Buddha, Dharma, and assembly excellent, I take refuge till I come to full awakening. By the merit of my deeds like generosity, may I achieve Buddhahood for beings' benefit. In the Buddha, Dharma, and assembly excellent, I take refuge till I come to full awakening. By the merit of my deeds like generosity, may I achieve Buddhahood for beings' benefit. In the Buddha, Dharma, and assembly excellent, I take refuge till I come to full awakening. By the merit of my deeds like generosity, may I achieve Buddhahood for beings' benefit. May all mother sentient beings equal to space have happiness and the cause of happiness. May they be free of suffering and the cause of suffering. May they not be separated from the happiness free of suffering. May they abide in equanimity, free of attachment and aversion to near and far. May all mother sentient beings equal to space have happiness and the cause of happiness. May they be free from cause of suffering. May they not be separated from the happiness free of suffering. May they abide in equanimity, free of attachment and aversion to near and far. May all mother sentient beings equal to space have happiness and the cause of happiness. May they be free of suffering and the cause of suffering. May they not be separated from the happiness free of suffering. May they abide in equanimity, free of attachment and aversion to near and far. By prostrating, offering, and confessing thus, by rejoicing, urging, supplicating too, any little virtue that I have amassed, all I dedicate for full awakening. This ground daubed with fragrant water, with flowers strewn, is adorned by Meru, four lands, sun and moon. Seeing this to be a Buddha field, I offer it. May all beings experience this utterly pure land. Om Guru Ratna Mandala Pudza Mega Samudra Saparana Samaye Aha. Now the 37 practices of Bodhisattvas together. Homage to Lokeshvara. I pay constant homage through my three doors to my supreme teacher and protector, Chenrezig, who, while seeing all phenomena and lack coming and going, makes single-minded effort for the good of living beings. Perfect Buddha's source of all well-being and happiness arise from accomplishing the excellent teachings, and this depends on knowing the practices. So I will explain the practices of Bodhisattvas. Having gained this rare ship of freedom and fortune, here think and meditate unwaveringly night and day in order to free yourself and others from the ocean of cyclic existence. This is the practice of Bodhisattvas. Attached to your loved ones, you're stirred up like water. Hating your enemies, you burn like fire. In the darkness of confusion, you forget what to adopt and discard. Give up your homeland. This is the practice of Bodhisattvas. By avoiding bad objects, disturbing emotions gradually decrease. Without distraction, virtuous activities naturally increase. With clarity of mind, conviction in the teachings arises. Cultivate seclusion. This is the practice of Bodhisattvas. Loved ones who have long kept company will part. Wealth created with difficulty will be left behind. Consciousness, the guest, will leave the guest house of the body. Let go of this life. This is the practice of Bodhisattvas. When you keep their company, your three poisons increase. Your activities of hearing, thinking, and meditating decline, and they make you lose your love and compassion. Give up bad friends. This is the practice of Bodhisattvas. When you rely on them, your faults come to an end, and your good qualities grow like the waxing moon. Cherish spiritual teachers even more than your own body. This is the practice of Bodhisattvas. Bound himself in the jail of cyclic existence, what worldly god can give you protection? Therefore, when you seek refuge, take refuge in the three jewels which will not betray you. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. The subduer said, all the unbearable suffering of bad rebirths, fruit of wrongdoing. Therefore, even at the cost of your own life, never do wrong. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. Like dew on the tip of a blade of grass, pleasures of the three worlds last only a while and then vanish. Aspire to the never-changing supreme state of liberation. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. When your mothers who've loved you since time without beginning are suffering, what use is your own happiness? Therefore, to free limitless living beings, develop the altruistic intention. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. All suffering comes from the wish for your own happiness. Perfect Buddhas are born from the thought to help others. Therefore, exchange your own happiness for the suffering of others. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. Even if someone, out of strong desire, steals all your wealth or has it stolen, dedicate to him your body, possessions, and all your virtue, past, present, and future. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. Even if someone tries to cut off your head when you haven't done the slightest thing wrong, out of compassion, take all his misdeeds upon yourself. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. Even if someone broadcasts all kinds of unpleasant remarks about you throughout the 3,000 worlds, in return, with a loving mind, speak of his good qualities. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. Though someone may deride and speak bad words about you in a public gathering, looking on him as a spiritual teacher, bow to him with respect. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. Even if a person for whom you've cared like your own child regards you as an enemy, cherish him specially like a mother does her child who's stricken with sickness. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. If an equal or inferior person disparages you out of pride, place him as you would your spiritual teacher with respect on the crown of your head. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. Though you lack what you need and are constantly disparaged, afflicted by dangerous sickness and spirits, without discouragement take on the misdeeds and the pain of all living beings. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. Though you become famous and many bow to you, and you gain riches to equal Vaishravanas, see that worldly fortune is without essence and be unconceited. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. While the enemy of your own anger is unsubdued, though you conquer external foes, they will only increase. Therefore, with the militia of love and compassion, subdue your own mind. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. Sensual pleasures are like salt water. The more you indulge, the more thirst increases. Abandon at once those things which breed clinging attachment. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. Whatever appears is your own mind. Your mind from the start was free from fabricated extremes. Understanding this, do not take to mind inherent signs of subject and object. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. When you encounter attractive objects, though they seem beautiful like a rainbow in summer, don't regard them as real and give up attachment. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. All forms of suffering are like a child's death in a dream. Holding illusory appearances to be true makes you weary. Therefore, when you meet with disagreeable circumstances, see them as illusory. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. When those who want enlightenment must give even their body, there is no need to mention external things. Therefore, without hope for return or any fruition, give generously. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. Without ethics, you can't accomplish your own well-being, so wanting to accomplish others is laughable. Therefore, without worldly aspirations, safeguard your ethical discipline. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. To bodhisattvas who want a wealth of virtue, those who harm are like a precious treasure. Therefore, towards all, cultivate patience without hostility. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. Seeing even hearers and solitary realizers who accomplish only their own good, strive as if to put out a fire on their head. For the sake of all beings, make enthusiastic effort, the source of all good qualities. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. Understanding that disturbing emotions are destroyed by special insight with calm abiding, cultivate concentration which surpasses the four formless absorptions. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. Since the five perfections, without wisdom, cannot bring perfect enlightenment, along with skillful means, cultivate the wisdom which does not conceive the three spheres as real. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. If you don't examine your own errors, you may look like a practitioner but not act as one. Therefore, always examining your own errors, rid yourself of them. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. If through the influence of disturbing emotions you point out the faults of another bodhisattva, you yourself are diminished. So don't mention the faults of those who have entered the great vehicle. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. Reward and respect cause us to quarrel and make hearing, thinking, and meditation decline. For this reason, give up attachment to the households of friends, relations, and benefactors. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. Harsh words disturb the minds of others and cause deterioration in a bodhisattva's conduct. Therefore, give up harsh words which are unpleasant to others. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. Habitual disturbing emotions are hard to stop through counteractions. Armed with antidotes, the guards of mindfulness and mental alertness destroy disturbing emotions like attachment at once, as soon as they arise. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. In brief, whatever you are doing, ask yourself, what's the state of my mind? With constant mindfulness and mental alertness, accomplish others' good. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. To remove the suffering of limitless beings, understanding the purity of the three spheres, dedicate the virtue for making such effort to enlightenment. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. For all who want to train on the bodhisattva path, I have written the 37 practices of bodhisattvas, following what has been said by the excellent ones on the meaning, sutras, tantras, and treatises. Though not poetically pleasing to scholars, owing to my poor intelligence and lack of learning, I've relied on the sutras and the words of the excellent, so I think these bodhisattva practices are without error. However, as the great deeds of bodhisattvas are hard to fathom for one of my poor intelligence, I beg the excellent to forgive all faults, such as contradictions and non sequiturs. Through the virtue from this, may all living beings gain the ultimate and conventional altruistic intention, and thereby become like the protector Chenrezig, who dwells in neither extreme, not in the world nor in peace. Does anyone remember when remember the tremendous tsunami that was in Japan a few years ago? When that was? I'm going to see if I can find a date for it. 2011 sounds right. Yeah, 2011. Thank you. I'm inspired this morning by a couple of things. One, first, this along these lines, you might remember this line from Hamlet. Let me see if I can find it here. This is where Hamlet's father, who's been murdered, appears to him as a ghost and lets him know that he was murdered. So Hamlet has, I think, is some sort of an advisor to the throne or something like that. Horatio, who's a very rational man, a very modern man, and Horatio, Hamlet says to him, "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy." It's very much what we're dealing with here. There's more to reality, you might say, than what appears to our limited mind, our rational thinking mind. And the paradox is that, we have the scholar Edward Kanzi was talking about going way back, how into the Middle Ages, in the West anyway, the reigning kind of motivation, philosophical motivation, in just pure philosophy was, my old brain is forgetting all the terms, but basically the study of reality, what was the nature of reality. And then it changed. The most famous philosopher of this change is William of Ockham, and he believed that, well, instead of talking about the nature of reality, we should just be talking about how things work. And he came up with this idea of, it's Occam's razor. You know, when something proposes something to you, what's the simplest explanation? Well, that's almost always right. So let's go with that. So modern philosophy became what's called epistemology, just looking at how things work, and doesn't even get into any kind of transcendent kind of truth. But as the scholar Kanze said, the craziness of this is that if you go to a culture where this transcendence is important, like Burma or something, Tibet, those people are happier in this very life, this material life, than people who just are merely just into the appearances. Because we are wired that way. It's our nature to seek meaning. I think that all of us, the first noble truth, life is dissatisfactory, because we have this inherent sense of wholeness. And when things aren't there, we see the limitations. We naturally are searching for a way to sort of get beyond that. It's not really beyond, it's right here, right now, all the time, this very body, the body of Buddha. But we don't see it that way. So we have this natural and positive urge for meaning, for a path. So, our bigger Dharma community includes my sons-in-law. Tracy's husband, Ariel Stillerman, has just published a book. He's a assistant professor, associate, I get him confused, at Stanford, on, of all things, Japanese literature. And he's written a book, Court Poetry and the Culture of Learning in Japan. We'll do some of it probably another time, maybe not time this morning. But in reading it, he's talking about court poetry in Japan. This is going back to the 700s. And lo and behold, all of these transcendent kind of truths, you might say, but also recognition of this in-between world, we might say. Kanze also, sorry to be hammering on Kanze this morning. I wasn't even reading him this week. But he talks about this world of appearances that we all live in, right? And then there's this transcendent world. We call it Dharmakaya, just limitless, nothing you can say about it. Dalai Lama says it's like the sky, just completely vast. But then there's this in-between kind of realm. The leprechauns, since we're at St. Patrick's Day, the leprechauns, the ghosts, the spirits, the things that we make offerings to. We sort of pay rent to the local spirits so that they will be peaceful and let us practice the Dharma, because that's going to benefit them too. To the modern mind, we've made all these things go away. We think that they're just sort of myths in that. But of course, they can't be pinned down scientifically. So rather than trying to deal with them and the effects that they have, because in this vastness of unity and completeness, cause and effect is the great teaching. Everything has an effect. But we're ignorant of these things. So in Ariel's book, he has these amazing statements from some of these great Japanese commentators on poetry, again, from more than 1,000 years ago. If you're like me, we look at Tibet, and something that strikes you are all these different, Menmos and Kenmos, all these different kind of entities floating around, all these unenlightened spirits and that. It just seems like superstition to most of us, because we're trained like William of Ockham, right? If you look at Japan, you don't see that. And this seems kind of a little bit easier for us to accept, a little more satisfactory. So if you look at Zen Buddhism, if you look at Pure Land Buddhism, there's not so much of that going on. And we think that it's not there, but it is there. It's just that the Japanese are so subtle and polite, you might say. So just to give you this commentary from this classical Japanese commentator, it says, when original beings take temporary manifestation. Their forms are diverse, but their essence is unchanged. In our land, the Buddhas softened their radiance and manifested as godly brightness, softening the rough hearts of people and working as expedient means to assist the belief in the law of the Buddha. So the greatness of the Dharma is that it uses everything. This is why it's so powerful. This is great compassion. Again, somewhere else, this is written in 1964, but Kanze said, there's a form of European Buddhism, he said, that denies all of this. But that is not the Buddhism of the Buddhists. When we were in Japan, we were fortunate because Ariel and Tracy were living in Tokyo at the time. Ariel was some sort of study at Wakeda University. What was it, Gretch? Can't remember. A university in Tokyo. Yeah. But anyway, so we were very fortunate because we had this guide that could take us around, who's fluent in Japanese and could read. You go to Europe, you read into languages, but they're all using the Roman alphabet, right? So if you stay away from the Slavic states, except the Poles, you can read where to go. Paris, I'm going there. Okay, I can read it. I can't speak French, but I know I'm going to the right place. But you go to Japan and you look up on the board, you can't read nothing. So we were very fortunate. Such an efficient trip. But one of the places we went to Kyoto, of course, and we were there. The first thing we saw was on the hills surrounding Kyoto, this temple. We could see this temple up on the hillside. And we said, man, let's go there. So Ariel took us there. Kiyomizu, it is. It means something like holy water. When we got there, it was founded in the 700s by an itinerant monk wandering around. And he found this spring coming out of the side of this mountain. And he made a statue of Chenrezig, Kanon in Japanese. And a temple came up around that. So there's still these holy waters, healing waters that come out there. And we happened to go there. So in his book, at the end of this beautiful discussion of the unity of these gods, small g, and Buddhas, the unity of words and truth, Ariel has this poem. This was the composition by the Kanon, by Chenrezig at Kiyomizu. They believe that Chenrezig said this. Rely on me. So should all sentient beings, numerous like the mugwort in the fields of Shimeji, as long as I am in this world. So in other words, it's important that it's in this world. It's not just some transcendence away from all of this, but completely embracing it. We'll say more of this in the future, but it mentions, for instance, in this classical Japanese court poetry, you could only use 31 different Chinese characters. The Japanese, again, they took over the writing system from Japan, just like Tibet took over the writing system from India, even though Tibetan and Sanskrit are not related linguistically. So the Japanese took over the writing system of China, even though the two languages are totally different. So you had all these characters, it's so impressive how even Chinese kids learn all these things. There are 31 characters in this classic poetry. They're the only characters you can use. And interestingly, there are 31 chapters in the Mahavajrayana Sutra. This is the unity, the unity underlying this culture, these teachings. Now, I often think of us as really, truly, as barbarians. We don't understand. We often don't feel the depths. We feel the depths of these things, but we don't really have a language with which we can approach them and use them, utilize them. So along those lines, I was reminded of the tsunami in something that happened, was written about the tsunami in Japan. And 14, 15 years ago. Let me bring this up. This is an article that appeared in the London Review of Books called Ghosts of the Tsunami. Let me read some of this. I met a priest in the north of Japan who exorcised the spirits of people who had drowned in the tsunami. The ghosts did not appear in large numbers until late in the year, but Reverend Kaneda's first case of possession came to him after less than a fortnight. He was chief priest in a Zen temple in the inland town of Kurihara. The earthquake on 11 March 2011 was the most violent that he or anyone he knew had ever experienced. The great wooden beams of the temple's halls had flexed and groaned with the strain. Power, water, and telephone lines were fractured for days. Deprived of electricity, people in Kurihara, 30 miles from the coast, had a dimmer idea of what was going on there than television viewers on the other side of the world. But it became clear enough when first a handful of families and then a mass of them began arriving at his temple with corpses to bury. Nearly 20,000 people had died at a stroke. In the space of a month, Kaneda performed funeral services for 200. More appalling than the scale of death was the spectacle of the bereaved survivors. They didn't cry, Kaneda said to me a year later. There was no emotion at all. The loss was so profound and death had come so suddenly, they understood the facts of their situation individually, that they had lost their homes, lost their livelihoods, and lost their families. They understood each piece, but they couldn't see it as a whole, and they couldn't understand what they should do, as sometimes even when they were. I couldn't really talk to them, to be honest. All I could do was stay with them and read the sutras and conduct the ceremonies. That was the thing I could do. Amid the numbness and horror, Kaneda received a visit from a man he knew, a local builder, whom I will call Takeshi Ono. Ono was ashamed of what had happened and didn't want his real name to be published. He's such an innocent person, Kaneda said to me. He takes everything at face value. You're from England, aren't you? He's like your Mr. Bean. I wouldn't have gone so far because there was nothing ridiculous about Ono. He was a strong, stocky man in his late 30s, the kind of man most comfortable in blue overalls, but he had a dreamy ingenuousness that made the story he told all the more believable. He had been at work on a house when the earthquake struck. He clung to the ground for as long as it lasted. Even his lorry shook as if it were about to topple over. The drive home along roads without traffic lights was alarming, but the physical damage was remarkably slight. A few telegraph poles lolling at an angle, toppled garden walls, as the owner of a small building firm, no one was better equipped to deal with the practical inconveniences inflicted by an earthquake. Ono spent the next few days busying himself with camping stoves, generators, jerry cans, paying little attention to the news. But once television was restored, it was impossible to be unaware of what had happened. Ono watched the endlessly replayed image of the explosive plume above the nuclear reactor and the mobile phone films the black wave crunching up ports, houses, shopping centers, cars, and human figures. There were places he had known all his life. These were places, fishing towns and beaches just over the hills, an hour's drive away. And watching their destruction produced in Ono a feeling common at that time, even among those most directly affected by displacement and bereavement. Although what had happened was undeniable, the destruction of entire towns and villages, the extinction of a multitude, it was also impossible. Impossible and, in fact, absurd, insupportable, soul-crushing, unfathomable, but also just silly. Quote, my life had returned to normal, he told me. I had petrol, I had electricity. No one I knew was dead or hurt. I hadn't seen the tsunami myself, not with my own eyes, so I felt as if I was in kind of a dream. Ten days after the disaster, Ono, his wife, and his widowed mother drove over the mountains to see for themselves. They left in the morning in good spirits, stopped on the way to go shopping, and reached the coast in time for lunch. For most of the journey, the scene was familiar: brown rice fields, villages of wood and tile, bridges over wide, slow rivers. Once they had climbed into the hills, they passed more and more emergency vehicles, not only those of the police and fire, but military trucks. And as the road descended towards the coast, their jaunty mood began to evaporate. Suddenly, before they understood where they were, they had entered the tsunami zone. There was no advance warning, no marginal area of incremental damage. The wave had come in with full force, spent itself, and stopped at a point as clearly defined as the reach of a high tide. Above it, nothing had been touched. Below it, everything was changed. No still photograph was capable of describing it. Even television images failed to encompass the panoramic quality of the disaster, the sense within the plane of destruction, of being surrounded by it on all sides. In describing the landscape of war, we often speak of total devastation, but even the most intense aerial bombing leaves walls and foundations of burned-out buildings, as well as parks and woods, roads and tracks, fields and cemeteries. The tsunami spared nothing and achieved feats of surreal juxtaposition that no mere explosion could match. It plucked forests up by their roots, scattered them miles inland. It peeled the macadam off the roads and cast it hither and thither in buckled ribbons. It stripped houses to their foundations and lifted cars, lorries, ships, and corpses over the tops of tall buildings. At this point in Ono's narrative, he became reluctant to describe in detail what he did or where he went. I saw the rubble. I saw the sea. I saw buildings damaged by the tsunami. It wasn't just the things themselves, but the atmosphere. It was a place I used to go so often. It was such a shock to see it. And all the police and soldiers there, it's difficult to describe, felt dangerous. My first feeling that this is terrible. My next thought was, is it real? Ono, his wife and mother, sat down for dinner as usual that evening. He remembered that he drank 2 small cans of beer with his meal. Afterwards, and for no obvious reason, he began calling friends on his mobile phone. I'd just ring and say, "Hi, how are you?" That kind of thing. They told me it wasn't much I had to say. I don't know why. I was starting to feel very lonely. His wife had already left the house when he woke the next morning. Ono had no particular work of his own, so he passed an idle day at home. His mother bustled in and out, but she seemed mysteriously... Sorry, I'm fiddling with my mouse. Is something wrong? Ono asked. I'm divorcing you, she replied. Divorce? But why? And so his wife and mother described the events of the night before, after the round of needy phone calls. How he had jumped down on all fours and began licking the tatami mats and futon and squirmed on them like a beast. How at first they had nervously laughed at his tomfoolery, but then been silenced when he began snarling, quote, "You must die, you must die, everyone must die, everything must die and be lost." In front of the house was an unsown field, and Ono had run out into it and rolled over and over in the mud as if he was being tumbled by a wave, shouting, "There, over there, they're all over there, look." Then he had stood up and walked out in the field, calling, "I'm coming to you, I'm coming over to that side," before his wife physically wrestled him back into the house. The writhing and bellowing went on all night until around 5 a.m. Ono cried out, "There's something on top of me," collapsed and fell asleep. My wife and my mother were anxious and upset, he said. Of course, I told them how sorry I was, but I had no memory of what I did or why. It went on for 3 nights. The next evening, as darkness fell, he saw figures walking past the house, parents and children. A group of young friends, a grandfather and a child. They were covered in mud, he said. They were no more than 20 feet away, and they stared at me, but I wasn't afraid. I just thought, why are they in those muddy things? Why don't they change their clothes? Perhaps their washing machine's broken. They were like people I might have known once or even seen before somewhere. Scene was flickering like a film, but I felt perfectly normal, and I thought that they were just ordinary people. The next day, Ono was lethargic and inert. At night, he would lie down, sleep heavily for 10 minutes, then wake up as lively and refreshed as if 8 hours had passed. He staggered when he walked, glared at his wife and mother, and even waved a knife. "Drop dead," he would snarl. "Everybody else is dead, so die." After 3 days of pleading by his family, he went to Reverend Kaneda at the Zen temple. His eyes were dull, Kaneda said, like a person with depression after taking their medication. I knew at a glance that something was wrong. Ono recounted the visit to the coast. His wife and mother described his behavior. The Reverend was looking hard at me. I spoke, Ono said, and in part of my mind I was saying, "Don't look at me like that, you bastard. I hate your guts. Why are you looking at me?" Kaneda took Ono by the hand and led him to the main hall of the temple. He told me to sit down. I was not myself. I still remember that strong feeling of resistance. But part of me was also relieved. I wanted to be helped and to believe in the priest. The part of me that was still wanted to be saved. Kaneda beat the temple drum as he chanted the Heart Sutra. No eye, ear, nose. Tongue, no body, no mind, no color, no sound. Or smell, no taste, no touch, no thing, no realm of sight. No realm of thoughts, no ignorance, no end to ignorance, no old age and no death, no end to age and death, no suffering, nor any cause of suffering, nor end to suffering, nor path, no wisdom, and no fulfillment. Ona's wife told him that he pressed his hands together in prayer, and then at the priest's recitation continued, they rose high above his head as if being pulled from above. The priest splashed him with holy water, and then suddenly he returned to his senses and found himself with wet hair and shirt, filled with a sensation of tranquility and release. My head was light, he said. In a moment, the thing that had been there had gone. I felt fine physically, but my nose was blocked, as if I'd come down with a heavy cold. Kaneda spoke to him sternly. They both understood what had happened. Ono told me he'd walked along the beach in the devastated area eating an ice cream. The priest said he even put up a sign in the car on the windshield saying disaster relief so that no one would stop him. He went there flippantly without giving it any thought at all. I told him, you fool, you go to a place where many people have died. You must go with a feeling of respect. That's common sense. You have suffered a kind of punishment for what you did. Something got hold of you, perhaps the dead who cannot accept yet that they are dead. They have been trying to express their regret and their resentment through you. Kaneda smiled as he remembered it. Mr. Bean, he said, he's so innocent and open. That's another reason they were able to possess him. Ono recognized all this and more. It wasn't just the spirits of men and women that had possessed him, he saw now, but also animals, cats and dogs and other beasts who had drowned with their masters. He thanked the priest and drove home. His nose was streaming as if with a cold, but what came out was not mucus, but a bright pink jelly like nothing he had ever seen before. The wave penetrated no more than a few miles inland, but over the hills in Kurihara it transformed the life of Reverend Kaneda. He had inherited his temple as his son and grandson of the previous priests, and the task of dealing with the survivors of the tsunami had tested him in ways for which he was unprepared. It had been the greatest disaster of post-war Japan. No larger single loss of life had occurred since the bombing of Nagasaki, and yet the pain did not announce itself. It dug underground and burrowed deep. Once the immediate emergency abated, once the bodies were cremated, the memorial services held, and the homeless sheltered, Kaneda set about trying to gain entry into the dungeon of silence in which he saw many of the survivors languishing. He began traveling around the coast with a group of fellow priests, organizing an event he called Café de Monku, a bilingual pun. As well as being the Japanese pronunciation of the word monk, Monku means complaint. We think it will take a long time to get back to a calm, quiet, ordinary life, the flyer said. Why don't you come and join us? Take a break and have a little moan. The monks will listen to your complaint and have a monku of their own, too. Under the pretext, a casual cup of tea and a friendly chat, people came to the temples and community centers where Café de Monku was held. Many lived in temporary residences, the grim prefabricated huts freezing in winter and sweltering in summer, where those who could afford nothing better ended up. The priest listened sympathetically and made a point of not asking too many questions. People don't like to cry, Kaneda said. They see it as selfish. Among those who are living in the temporary homes, there's hardly anyone who hasn't lost a member of their family. Everyone's in the same boat, so they don't like to seem self-indulgent, but when they start talking, when you listen to them, sense their gritted teeth and their suffering, all the suffering they can and won't express, in time the tears come, and they flow without end. Haltingly, apologetically, then, with increasing fluency, the survivors spoke of the terror of the wave, the pain of bereavement, and their fears for the future. They also talked about encounters with the supernatural. They described sightings of ghostly strangers, friends and neighbors, and dead loved ones. They reported hauntings at home, at work, in offices and public places, on the beaches, and in the ruined town. The experiences ranged from eerie dreams and feelings of vague unease to cases like that of Takeshi Ono of outright possession. A young man complained of pressure on his chest at night, as if some creature were straddling him as he slept. A teenage girl spoke of a fearful figure who squatted in her house. A middle-aged man hated to go out in the rain because the eyes of the dead stared at him from puddles. A civil servant in Soma visited a devastated stretch of coast and saw a solitary woman in a scarlet dress far from the nearest road or house, with no means of transport in sight. When he looked for her again, she had disappeared. A fire station in Tajago received calls to places where all the houses had been destroyed by the tsunami. The crews went out to the ruins anyway, prayed for the spirits of those who had died, and the ghostly calls ceased. A cab driver in the city of Sendai picked up a sad-faced man who asked to be taken to an address that no longer existed. Halfway through the journey, he looked in his mirror to see the rear seat was empty. He drove on anyway, stopped in front of the leveled foundations of a destroyed house, and politely opened the door to allow the invisible passenger out at his former home. At a refugee community in Anagawa, an old neighbor would appear in the living rooms of the temporary houses and sit down for a cup of tea with the startled occupants. No one had the heart to tell her she was dead. The cushion on which she sat was wet with seawater. Priests, Christians, and Shinto, as well as Buddhists, found themselves called on repeatedly to quell unhappy spirits. A Buddhist monk wrote an article in a learned journal about the ghost problem, and academics at Tohoku University began to catalog the stories. So many people are having these experiences, Kaneda told me. It's impossible to identify who and where they all are. But there are countless such people, and I think their number is going to increase. And all we do is treat the symptoms. When opinion polls put the question, how religious are you, the Japanese rank among the most ungodly people in the world. It took a catastrophe for me to understand how misleading this self-assessment is. It's true that the organized religions, Buddhism and Shinto, have little influence on private or national life, but over the centuries, both have been pressed into the service of the true faith of Japan, cult of the ancestors. I knew about the household altars, which are seen in most homes and on which memorial tablets of dead ancestors are displayed. These butsudan are black cabinets of lacquer and gilt with openwork carvings of lions and birds. The upright tablets of black polished wood, vertically inscribed in gold. Offerings of flour, incense, rice, fruit, and drinks are placed before them at the summer festival of the dead. Families light candles and lanterns to welcome home the ancestral spirits. I had assumed that these picturesque practices were matters of symbolism and custom, attended to in the same way that people in the West will participate in a Christian funeral without any literal belief in the words of the liturgy. But in Japan, spiritual beliefs are regarded less as expressions of faith than as simple common sense, so lightly and casually worn that it's easy to miss them altogether. The dead are not as dead. The dead are not as dead there as they are in our own society, the religious scholar Herman Ooms writes. It has always made perfect sense in Japan, as far back as history goes, to treat the dead as more alive than we do, even to the extent that death becomes a variant, not a negation of life. All right, finding again. At the heart of ancestor worship is a contract. The food, drink, prayers, and rituals offered by their descendants gratify the dead, who in turn bestow good fortune on the living. Families vary in how seriously they take these ceremonies, but even for the unobservant, the dead play a continuing part in domestic life. For much of the time, their status is something like that of beloved, deaf, and slightly batty old folks who can't expect to be the center of the family, but who are made to be feel important on important occasions. Young people have passed important entrance exams, got a job, or made a good marriage kneel before the family shrine to report their success. When grief is raw, the presence of the deceased is overwhelming. In households that lost children in the tsunami, it became routine after a half hour of tea and chat to be asked if I would like to meet the dead sons and daughters. I'd be led to a shrine covered with framed photographs, drink, snacks, letters, drawings, and school exercise books. One mother had commissioned Photoshop portraits of her children, showing them as they would have been had they lived. A boy who died in primary school, smiling proudly in high school uniform. A teenage girl as she should have looked in the kimono at her coming-of-age ceremony. Here every morning she began the day by talking to her dead children, weeping love and apology, as unselfconsciously as if she were speaking over a long-distance telephone line. Tsunami did appalling violence to the religion of the ancestors, along with walls, roofs, and people that water carried away, household altars. Memorial tablets, family photographs, cemetery vaults were ripped open, the bones of the dead scattered, temples destroyed, along with memorial books listing the names of ancestors over generations. When people die violently or prematurely, in anguish and anger, they are at risk of becoming hungry ghosts who wander between worlds, propagating curses and mischief. There are rituals for placating unhappy spirits, but in the aftermath of the disaster, few families were in a position to perform them. And then there were those ancestors whose descendants were entirely wiped out by the wave. Their comfort in the afterlife depended entirely on the reverence of the living families who had been permanently and irrevocably cut off. Their situation was as helpless as that of orphaned children. Thousands of spirits had passed from life to death. Countless others were cut loose from their moorings in the afterlife. How could they all be cared for? Who was to honor the compact between the living and the dead? In such circumstances, how could there fail to be a swarm of ghosts? Even before the tsunami struck, nowhere in Japan was closer to the world of the dead than Tohoku, the northern part of the island of Honshu. In ancient times, in a notorious frontier realm of barbarians, goblins, and bitter cold. For modern Japanese, it remains a remote, marginal, family melancholy place, thick dialects and quaint conservatism, symbol of a rural tradition that for city dwellers is no more than a folk memory. It has bullet trains and smartphones, but it also has secret Buddhist cults, a lively literature of supernatural tales, and a sisterhood of blind shamanesses who gather once a year at a volcano called Mount Fear, the traditional entrance to the underworld. Sorry. This woman was giving, again, meetings at community centers and things like that. And she met a woman. She was a calm, neat young woman with black glasses and a fringe who worked up at Sendai in a care home for the disabled. The fishing port of where she grew up was one of the towns worst hit by the tsunami. Her family's home was beyond the reach of the wave, and her mother, sister, and grandparents untouched by it. But her father, a maritime engineer, worked in an office at the town's harbor front, and that evening he didn't come home. I thought about him all the time, she said. It was obvious something had happened, but I said to myself, he might be injured. He might be lying in a hospital somewhere. I knew that I should prepare for the worst, but I wasn't prepared at all. She passed painful days in Sendai trying to clean up the mess caused in her flat by the earthquake, thinking always of her father. 2 weeks after the disaster, his body was found. She arrived back at her family home just before the coffin was carried in. Friends and extended family had gathered, most of them casually dressed, everything black, everything formal. He hadn't drowned as most people did. He died of a blow to the chest or some big piece of rubble. The coffin, you could only see his face through a glass window. It had been 2 weeks, and I was afraid that the body might have decayed. I looked through the window. I could see he had a few cuts. He was pale, but was still the face of my father. She wanted to touch the face for the last time, but the casket, its window had been sealed shut. On it lay a white flower, a single cut stem placed on the coffin wood by the undertaker. It was nothing unusual, but to Anne it was extraordinary. 10 days later, at the height of her hope and despair, in an effort to escape her anxiety, she had gone to a big public bathhouse to soak in the hot spring water. When she came out, she retrieved her boots from the locker and felt an obstruction in the toe as she pulled them on. I could feel how cold it was, she remembered, even through my socks, and it felt soft, fluffy. She reached in and removed a white flower, as fresh and flawless as it had been cut. A minor mystery. How could such an object have found its way into a boot inside a locked container? It faded from her mind until the moment in front of her father's coffin when the same flower presented itself again. The first time I had the feeling that it might be a premonition of bad news. Dad might be alive anymore, but this might be a sign of his death. But then I thought about it later, about the coolness of the flower and the whiteness of the flower and that feeling of softness against my toe. And I thought of that and the touch of my father, which I couldn't experience when he was in his coffin. She knew that the flower was just a flower. She didn't believe in ghosts, that a dead father had sent it to her as a sign. If such communication was possible, why would a loving parent express it in such obscure terms? I think it was a coincidence, she said, and that I made something good of it. When people see ghosts, they're telling a story which has been broken off. They dream of ghosts because then the story carries on or comes to a conclusion. And if that brings them comfort, that's a good thing. Committed to print as a kaidan, published in the magazine, it took on greater significance. There were thousands of deaths, each of them different, she said. Most of them have never been told. My father's name was Totsumo Suto. Writing about him, I share his death with others. Perhaps I save him in some way. Perhaps I save myself. One more. Again, the Zen priest meeting with people. One of the first was a middle-aged man speaking through Rumiko, despairingly called the name of his daughter. Kaori, he said, the voice. Kaori, I have to get to Kaori. Where are you, Kaori? I have to get to the school. There's a tsunami coming. The man's daughter had been at her school by the sea when the earthquake struck. He had rushed out of work and driven along the coast to pick her up when the water had overtaken him. His agitation was intense. He was impatient and suspicious of the Zen priest. The voice asked, am I alive or not? No, Kaneda said, you are dead. And how many people died? The voice asked. 20,000 people died. 20,000, so many. Later, Kaneda asked him where he was. I'm at the bottom of the sea. It's very cold. Come up from the sea in the world of light, Kaneda said. But light was so small, the man replied. There are bodies all around me, and I can't reach it. And who are you anyway? Who are you to lead me to the world of light? The conversations went round and round for 2 hours. Eventually, Kaneda said, sorry. Well, my computer just failed, and I can't get to the punchline. So sorry about that. Apart from the emotional power of this report, it's the acknowledgement of the reality of this. Instead of, these people coming to that Buddhist priest and him just telling them, well, it's just your emotions, or some sort of William of Ockham type of explanation. He accepted these people and embraced them in their reality. And this is not just a condescending kind of thing. It's that you recognize there's a reality there that perhaps you're not aware of. Because again, the teachings give you the vastness of scope with which this is not mere belief. Through the practices, we actually can experience things like this. And when you have these unusual experiences, if you go to a Lama and you say something, the Lama will say, if you're practicing correctly, will say, that's very good. You can use that for your inspiration and further wisdom, but burn it. Don't try to recreate it. In other words, we're practicing to experience the nature of the mind, not the appearances that are floating on the surface, although these come, and that's all good. We can read the stories of great practitioners. There's one with, one of the great figures of 19th century Tibet. And again, all of this is not about Tibet. It's just that the Tibetans have preserved the full range of the 84,000 methods that have been validated, you might say, that we can rely on. It's there in Japan too. It's a little more hidden. But nonetheless, it gave that priest, with his sort of natural faith in whatever experience he had, the ability to be sincere, not looking down the nose. You know, the Dalai Lama has said that people think of compassion as I'm up here because I've got wisdom or greater understanding or whatever, and I'm looking down at sentient beings and I'm going to save them, right? He says that's exactly wrong. The Buddhist teachings is that we are looking up at the sentient beings because we wouldn't have this situation here except for an infinity of beings that have made it possible for us to be here. And we're here because they have sacrificed for us. The mother involves in all sorts of kind of, you might say, selfish behavior, at least, you know, very strongly attached to her child as opposed to, you know, all sentient beings. And for that, she pays a price karmically. So we have gratitude to these people. They've sacrificed themselves for us. And when a great disaster like happened in Japan, you know, suddenly there's somewhere William Blake says something about when the eyes of perception, you know, the whatever it was, I can't remember, but when it's cleared a little bit, you can have insights into these things. It's not about having experiences like this. It's about bodhicitta. It's about training ourselves and then realizing the mind. And the quality of this mind, the only thing we can say about it is that it wants the freedom of all without clinging and without taking any credit for it. It's said that there's a Chinese poem, I think, about the action of a great bodhisattva. You know, it's like sleeping at night and somehow the pillow is a little bit off. And so you reach and you pull the pillow so that it's right again. There's no ego there saying, aren't I wonderful for grabbing this pillow? Won't people think I'm special for grabbing this pillow? I'm doing the right thing. None of that's there. It's just, you know, pure compassion, just spontaneous. All right, so forgive me a little bit more, and thank you for your patience this morning going through this long article. I'll put it up so people can read it, because the last story was the most dramatic one, of course, and I blew it. Says something about all of us. So let's take a break, and we'll come back for our adjourned meeting, which should not be too long, but a chance to go through the finances of the place and, you know, questions and all of that. At any rate, take a break, and we'll come back.
So if you're watching on YouTube, I'm going to close the YouTube session and come over to Zoom if you want to join the meeting.